Hello, everyone, and welcome to Esoterica. I'm Leah Eichler, and I am back with Susan Catto, our editor-in-chief at Esoterica
Hello.
magazine. Hello, Sue. So good to see you again.
It's great to be here again. Very
So,
exciting.
we're going to start off, I think, with some, I guess, fan mail, if we want to call it that. Let's be nice to ourselves and call it fan mail. We got some fan mail from our last podcast about F-boys in classic literature. And for those of you that missed last week's podcast, on our website, on esotericamag.com, you can read Susan's brilliant piece on Jane Austen's F-boys. Can we say fuck boys on? I don't know. Let's just say fuck boys because that's what they are. Oops. Okay. Maybe F-boys. Let's go. Let's do that. Let's keep it PG-13. So Sue wrote this great piece about F-boys in Jane Austen's work. And last week we discussed F-boys in the classics, and we had some feedback. Our writer didn't know. She confessed that she'd never heard of an F-boy and thought the TV show sounded very ew, which is true. I've never watched F-boy Island. It's not my thing. But she said that our conversation raised a lot of really good questions and wondered if male writers do a better job of depicting and creating believable and lovable bad boys. Okay, very thought-provoking question.
It is, especially the lovable. I mean, maybe they do a better job of creating lovable ones.
Well, it's interesting because I think we even touched on this a bit last week when we spoke about The World According to Garp, that sometimes there are men or male characters that, may be presented as bad boys or not as bad boys, but sometimes they are not exactly bad boys, are not necessarily maybe they are anti-feminist, but there's also something tragically flawed about them. I mean, I think of Mordecai Richler's male characters. I mean, would they be considered anti-feminist? Probably, but there is also something very flawed about most of them, and they are rooted in a certain time and place, right?
There's a lot of books that I read when I was like full of rage university student that I really should go back and reread because at the time I would like, I'm thinking of like Updike's Rabbit Run, and I was so irate about, the main character in that. I need to go back and reread it with with a middle-aged person's perspective and see how much was just humanity as opposed to sexism.
Right. And I mean, the writer goes on about women writers, and do they really know bad boys and what motivates them, or they just know their reactions to them, which is, I thought, also very interesting, from a female writer perspective. I mean, I never like to say that men can't write about women can write about men. I think they can both write about, or either, really. But what do you think, Sue?
Well, I mean, in my article on the F-boys of Jane Austen, I do think that there is a lot about the reaction to them in Jane Austen's work. And the reaction is like kind of a knowing, like even once they recognize that this person is a jerk, an F-boy, the appeal remains. They have a distance from it, but they're like, I still kind of want to give this guy the benefit of the doubt, or I want to think the best of him. So it is very much their reaction to them that is, going on. I think that, they do create, the writer said, do they create complex male characters or rather superficial archetypes or cartoons? I mean, I think that comes down to a great writer will create complex characters.
Right.
Male or female.
I totally agree. Well, it was interesting because she asked about dull, inattentive husbands, and a lot of, in Anna Karenina, Madame Bovary, Middlemarch. Like it's interesting because we don't, no one, I mean, I don't know a lot of writers myself who want to sit down and write about very boring husbands, but I mean, there are plenty of them in literature.
We should do a whole show on that, the boring husband.
What makes a boring husband? I don't know. But, the interesting part about her discussion is, that the whole idea, which is so controversial nowadays, about who's allowed to write about whom, and who gets those options. And of course, there can be, there's a variety of opinions, but there's something that you and I both came across on Twitter this week, which really was a little bizarre, where a writer who says she's a writer of a New York Times bestselling book. I have read the book, and I won't name names, but she said that Joyce Carol Oates was not hot enough to write about Marilyn Monroe, and a non-hottie cannot write about Marilyn Monroe. And I initially thought this was a joke, because I thought this was a play on, the, popular culture right now. But she seemed quite serious about it, and actually in her tweet seemed to double down on it later on. So, what do you say to that, really?
I also kind of thought it was a joke. What could a literary non-hottie know about the exploitation of femme, highly sexualized women? Although even that language made me go, maybe it's not a joke.
Right.
Women who look and act like Oates have no compassion or love for women like Marilyn. They're just as bad as men at writing them. And I thought it's kind of an outrageous thing to say.
Right.
But of course, as you might imagine, the phrase literary non-hottie immediately caught on, and it's been memed all over the internet, and people are proudly proclaiming themselves to be literary non-hotties.
But, again, it's interesting because it also comes down to, this very anti-feminist perspective of, what makes a hottie? I mean, let's go back to the male gaze, how men perceive women. In my perspective, like, being a literary person is pretty hot to begin with, because, who wouldn't want to talk about literature all the time? But, we all have different things we look for in people and friends and partners. But, did you see Marilyn? Did you watch the film?
I read a lot about it and kind of elected not to watch it because of what I was reading. But I know you watched it or tried to watch it. So
I tried to watch. I tried to watch Blonde, and I really wanted to like it. I really wanted to kind of embrace my university self that was really into art films and really, really edgy Lars von Trier's type films that would kind of, take you in a different, transport you in a different time place. But it was, I got about halfway through. It was, I think, largely unwatchable. It was very out there. It was a little challenging to follow, almost like a stream of consciousness type of film. But it's interesting because also the film has been very controversial.
Yeah, and the connection there is, of course, it's based on Joyce Carol Oates' book, Blonde. Right. And people felt that the initial criticism was that the director must be a terrible misogynist because he keeps putting Marilyn in these really awful, exploitative positions. And it was definitely seen as exploiting her as opposed to critiquing exploitation, which was probably more what he was aiming for. I give the benefit of the doubt who's aiming to, certainly what Joyce Carol Oates seemed to be saying that she was aiming.
Joyce Carol seems to be defending the film, which is, I think, completely fine, and that she defends it. But it's interesting. Joyce Carol has kept referring to something as the film being a post-Me Too film. So I'm not even sure if we are in this post-Me Too era, what that means, and how we're allowed to interpret it. I mean, but it was an interesting way to look at the film.
Wow. I'm going to have to think about.
I know. Post Me Too, right? I mean, so again, I think the controversy that everyone likes to discuss in terms of the film Blonde is the CGI creation of the fetus, the purported abortion that Marilyn had. And did she, what does it say? And does that feed into the whole narrative of, the anti-abortion rights people? So, it's interesting. So is it Me Too to talk about abortions in that way and to show, to show maybe some mixed feelings about it? What do you think?
I mean, I do think we're in a fairly doctrinaire age. I think I would read the Me Too part of it as saying here, and I say this not having read the book or watched the movie.
Right.
The angle might be a woman who chose to use her sexuality to appeal to men. And that goes, interestingly,
Right.
goes nicely with this person who tweeted about a literary non-hottie not understanding why someone might use their sexuality. But I as I say, I haven't seen it. But post Me Too might be saying, well, Marilyn was aware of what she was doing and what she was getting from men because she had this sexual power over them.
Right.
And so she had volition.
So it's interesting. And I say this as someone who's ardently and extremely pro-abortion rights. But what's interesting about it is if you think of the meta levels of the book or the film rather, I mean, even in the film, there's a distinction that the protagonist makes between Norma Jean and Marilyn. And I'm imagining that could be somewhat accurate. Marilyn Monroe was the character that she created. It wasn't necessarily her. It was an image that was fabricated by Hollywood, people. So this is kind of a character, imagining a character and then a character about that, because of course the film is not true to Marilyn Monroe's life necessarily. There's no proof that she ever had an abortion. From the cursory research that I've done, she may have had several miscarriages. She may have wanted to start a family, but if you take it like what kind of characters? I mean, characters have different motivations, and characters have different perspectives. And if this Marilyn Monroe character that wasn't even Marilyn Monroe created by Norma Jean, but Marilyn Monroe created by the filmmaker and by an author, she could very well have been torn by her abortion and had mixed feelings about it. So, I mean, it's interesting, if you look at it from a fever dream that this character may have had versus, let's try and make it something more actual, right?
It's interesting. I have read some fiction based on real people's lives. Curtis Sittenfeld wrote a couple of books. She wrote one from the perspective of Laura Bush.
Right.
Did she also write the one from the perspective of Hillary Clinton?
Oh, right. That's right. I remember now. This is ringing a bell. Yes.
And they're really interesting to read, but I always am like, don't you maybe want to like? It's a little more obviously fictionalized when people like that are doing it, and props for the courage of writing a novelization of a real live living person.
Right. That is very challenging. So, we neglected to mention this last week, and our plate was full, but the last week of September is always a banned book week. So hooray for banned books.
We love hooray for banned books, everyone.
Yeah, we love banned books. So, let's discuss banned books are fascinating because, they make it all the more appealing. Like, if you're a teenager, don't you want to read banned books? Like, that's
definitely want to read banned books. And I want to know, obviously things have become so politicized. They always have been banned books,
right?
But they've become so politicized in the United States in particular,
right?
But when you look at the list, and I was looking at specifically the Reader's Digest list, it points out that we don't really have a final list for 2022 yet, but it's looking at banned books from 2021, and the top 10 most banned books. I feel like I've seen like 50% of those books in my teenage daughter's hands because she is seeking them out. And these are books like The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. I wish she were here. I would ask her, like, what's the deal that these books are banned? But like in some cases, they're on the curriculum of a Toronto school. So
true. And I think, in my perspective, good literature is supposed to be controversial. It's supposed to make you think. It's supposed to give you pause, right?
The first banned book I heard about when I was younger was Bridge to Terabithia, which is a childhood classic.
Right.
It took me a while to figure out. I was like, is it banned because it's so sad and they don't want to make people?
So why is it banned? We should actually be.
It's banned because the girl, the main female character's parents are atheists. So when the unthinkable happens, they don't subscribe to it's okay, she's in heaven now story. So that's why.
Oh, well, okay, let's go through some of our favorite banned books because let's give a shout out to banned books, and um, maybe our audience will go to buy some banned books because hooray for banned books. So I actually recently reread 1984 only because I needed to remind myself that this dystopian view of the world has always been around, but 1984 is one of my favorite books that have ever been banned. There's obviously The Handmaid's Tale, which is, I feel like we've been talking about The Handmaid's Tale for years and years and years now. I'm almost a little tired of talking about it, but still a great book. And then Mouse. Mouse was on that, which of course I know why Mouse was banned. And I mean, now that was a controversy recently. I think it was U.S. School Board. I can't remember which one. Banned Mouse because, of course, it's depiction. I mean, it's language. It uses foul language. There's a very obviously vivid episode in which Art Spiegelman shows his mother's suicide. I mean, did you read Mouse?
I have. It's been a while, but yes.
Yeah.
And I mean yeah. It's just considered a classic. Didn't it win the Pulitzer Prize? Like
it did, yeah. And I mean, it is a classic. And in fact, I actually got my kids to read it at a very, very probably inappropriate young age, only because I think it is a very, as a child of Holocaust survivors, a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, you can't really mince words about how tragic things were. And there's got to be some way for them to learn. It's not taught that much in school. So, and I suppose if Mouse has been banned, then it's not going to be taught very much at all.
Well, Diary of Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank is also on it's number 5 on the most
banned list.
Yeah.
And so, and that's interesting. It's been a while since I read The Diary of Anne Frank. Let me see
So they say that it is because the 14-year-old's plain descriptions of her anatomy have been found pornographic.
Right, because she talks about getting her period, I think, in the Believe, and of course her budding sexuality. But I mean, for God's sakes, I mean, we could sit here and just shake our heads about it. But I mean, what are some other notable banned books that you?
Toni Morrison's books are routinely being banned. The Bluest Sky is one of the most banned.
Yeah.
The reason, I mean, her books they do have graphic descriptions and quote unquote offensive language. But I mean, again, a bit like you were talking about, there are events in history that are offensive.
The events themselves are offensive, and to try and make them try and clean them up is actually offensive. I mean, you can't really clean them up to make them to the point where they're actually okay to explain to a young child. So I mean, this is just the way it is, correct? I mean, it's fascinating. Fascinating. Lolita, what are your thoughts on Lolita? This is gonna be a tough one.
Lolita is a tough one. It's such a fantastic book. It really is. Literally, like the literary tricks that go on in that book. It's one of those books that the more you study it, the more you see in every line. And I think you'd have to be crazy to walk away from it saying this is a book that endorses, Humbert Humbert's behavior.
Right.
But I think, these books aren't banned because they endorse the behavior. They're banned because they portray the behavior in the first place.
Right.
And it may not be pleasant, but as we all know, these are things that happen in the world.
Interesting. I mean, so let's go back to that first kind of observation. Who's allowed to write about what? Do you think a book like Lolita could have been published today?
No, I do not think a book like Lolita could have been published today.
Right.
I really don't. For obvious kind of reasons. The subject matter would just be deemed. It reminds me when the novel started as a form in the early 18th century, women novelists were very rare on the ground because it was assumed that whatever they wrote, represented their true beliefs. So they could not have a female character who was any kind of combo of virtue and vice, because then that would mean that they had that vice in them. They couldn't really depict male vice either, because it meant they knew
about it, right?
Yeah. Absolute conflation. You have these books by these great, interesting women whose letters are fantastic. And then they'll write a book. Sarah Fielding comes to mind, Henry Fielding's sister. They'll write a book where the heroine is just a golden angel of virtue. And that was the only thing that was acceptable. So it's like a little bit like that now.
Yeah.
God forbid you write anything where the subject matter is controversial, because maybe you're endorsing that controversial point of view.
It's actually it's a really good point, and maybe worth going back and rereading Lolita again for that very reason.
Yeah.
So this week is we actually have Canadian Thanksgiving this week.
Yes.
We won't talk about that.
Some good reading.
Yeah, it's time to do some good reading. For me, it's always been kind of a few days off. I mean, I've never been a huge observer of the holiday. I mean, you grew up in the U.S. I mean, did you celebrate Thanksgiving more growing up?
I love all Thanksgivings. I see it as a chance to do some extra reading. And my suggestion is Canadian Thanksgiving is kind of coinciding with the Booker Prize shortlist for 2022, which has just come out. So if you ever wondered what to read this week, you can check out the Booker Prize shortlist. One of the things that I think is so interesting about this shortlist is there's no Canadians on the shortlist, which is a bummer. But two, it has the shortest book ever nominated, 116 pages, Claire Keegan's historical novel, Small Things Like These.
Interesting.
116 pages.
And it's actually very unusual for books to be that short.
I know. Yeah. I saw that they did have one nominated before on Chesil Beach by Ian McEwan, who's one of my favorite writers.
Right.
And when I think of that book, I don't think, oh, what a short book. But it was under 150 pages, apparently. So
really interesting.
But it had a lot of meat. So
yeah.
Obviously that doesn't matter. The other thing I found interesting about this shortlist was Alan Garner, Treacle Walker. His book, I think Alan Garner is 88 years old. So that makes him.
Wow. Okay. Well, I could hope a lot of us writers.
Yeah. The oldest person on ever to be nominated for a Booker Award. Now, it's not his first book. He didn't kind of come out of the blue at 88 and write a novel. But yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, you can still win. Maybe you can still win a Booker when you turn 80, 90. So I guess there's, something to aspire to, right?
So we have no excuse.
No one has any
The only author I've actually read on the list is Elizabeth Strout, whose book "Oh William" has been nominated, and it follows. She has recurring characters in her books. In this case, Lucy Barton is the heroine of this one, and she's just a really great writer whose books are kind of deceptively easy to read compared to what I sometimes think of. Some of the other books. I really think I will, after looking at this list, go and check them out. There's a book called Glory set in Zimbabwe. There's a book called The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida set in Sri Lanka. It's a very interesting list.
That sounds it sounds great. So I guess we can add, I can't show you right now off screen, but I have I have a pile of books about this high that I've been trying to get to, and I guess I can add a few more as the Booker Prize comes out. Yeah. So before we wrap up, a couple of little housekeeping notes. Our short story contest is still open for your submissions. So please send us your short stories. Susan and I will be the judges. We really love reading your short stories. Sue, anything you want to talk about in terms of what we're looking for? So people are always asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's really open to every type of short story that it should be something obviously that you feel passionately about bringing into the world. And just go ahead and submit it. Any guidelines you can find at esotericamag.com.
Yeah, and I think last week we discussed a little bit about what makes a great short story. But I mean, the great thing about literature is it's open to interpretation, and we want to see what yours is. So, send it. We have like a sweet spot, ideally, like not over like many thousands of words. I think, 3 to 5 is usually kind of like a good spot. But of course, if it's longer, send it, or if it's shorter, definitely send it. Always great to have like a beginning, middle, and end. I know I joke about that. It seems very ABC, but a lot of people don't include that. And I find it very satisfying to have an ending, even if some people don't.
I do love an ending.
People don't seem to like endings in short stories lately. Yeah, so please send us your short story. And if you have any comments about this podcast, or if you have ideas for topics, or if you want to appear on an episode of The Interview, then please do email us at editor@esotericamag.com, or follow us on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or any social media outlet you can think of, and let us know. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you. Take care, everybody. Until next week.